We now hear BJP leaders like Vikram Saini urging Indians to marry fair-skinned Kashmiri girls as if our women are commodities. And comments like that aren't a one-off. Another BJP leader, Vikram Randhawa, called for Kashmiris to be skinned alive. And these aren't the only examples, and not from 1947 like the Jammu genocide where 500,000 people were killed and 250,000 people disappeared in a couple of weeks. And that's reported by the editor of The Statesman, Ian Stevens. These are recent examples that I'm giving. Bipin Rawat, India's Chief of Defence Staff, he complained that protesters were carrying guns and that was a problem because it would be easier to justify killing them. Army officers screaming for rape on Indian news channels. 18th-month-old Hibba Nisar shot with pellets and blinded while she sat in her mother's lap. Journalists like Fahad Shah, Qazi Shibli, Sajjad Gul and Asif Sultan jailed for years for doing their job. 8-year-old Samir Rah, who was picked up after he went out to play, and when his body returned home, it was indicated that he was beaten by military weapons. Mubina Ganai was raped and gang raped on her wedding night. Parveena Ahangar's son was a victim of enforced disappearance 30 years ago. She's still roaming around looking for him. 9-month pregnant Tamanna was 9 months pregnant when she was raped and gang raped by the Indian Army and gave birth to a son 3 days later. 5-year-old Nasir was picked up by the Indian Army, his eye punctured with a sharp object and sand poured into it. 2 entire villages of women aged between 8 and 80 raped and gang raped in front of their families and their neighbors. Qalandar, who had both his legs amputated and then force-fed his own flesh. Abductees tortured in mosques under loudspeaker to instill fear and terror in the population, happening in my hometown with my families. So don't tell me what the reality inside Kashmir is. Civilians used as human shields and the officer responsible for it given an award. Cargo and Papatu are torture centers in Kashmir where pliers were used to pull people's fingernails out. Inmates electrocuted, sodomized, and rats used to feast on their scarred bodies. The burning of bodies and burying them in far-flung locations and not returning them to the families. Thousands of unmarked graves. I will not yield. PhD scholars like Ala Fazli jailed for an op-ed he wrote 11 years prior to being charged with terrorism and arrested. The murder and detention of legitimate political leadership under draconian laws. You must hear their names. Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, Ashraf Sehrai, Mrs. Asiya Andrabi, Qasim Faktu, Mrs. Nahida Nasreen, Yasin Malik, Ms. Fahmida Sofi, Shabir Shah, Sarjan Barkati, Altaf Shah, former bar presidents Mia Qayyum and Nazir Ranga, even underage children aren't spared. The heartbeat of Kashmir civil society, Khurram Parvez, quoted and cited by the United Nations, attempted to document as much as he could before being jailed and charged with sedition. Of all things, that's the cost of counting, the cost of recording and the cost of the truth. Not to mention how lawyer Jalil Andrabi was arrested to prevent him from appearing before the United Nations as a representative of the Kashmir Commission of Jurists. His cut-up dead body was found in the river with a bullet to the head and his eyes gouged out. This is what's led to the growth of indigenous groups like the TRF, PAFF, and Hizbul Mujahideen, lawfully engaged in a struggle for liberation, resisting the oppressor and fighting to preserve our identity. It is our moral and legal right to resist by all means necessary according to the UN documentation, which is right here. Those involved in armed resistance, they aren't illiterates. They're scholars like Manan Wani, teachers like Riaz Neku, students like Burhan Wani. At least let me quote from the Bhagavad Gita. Tolerating injustice is much a crime as committing injustice. It is your duty to fight injustice.